Welcome to the Modernize or Die podcast, CFML News Edition, where we keep you up to date with everything going on in the ColdFusion community. We'll share the latest news on events, releases to engines, frameworks, libraries, and tools, as well as spotlighting quality content from the community. Welcome back to the Modernize or Die podcast, CFML News Edition, November 3rd, 2020. It's voting day. It's a little crazy out there, Brad.
Yeah, I already did early voting, so I could just skip all the lines. Actually, it's kind of nice not have to worry about it. Now I can just podcast all day long.
Yeah, well, hopefully it won't take all day to get this out, but let's get on with it. So, thanks first to our sponsor, Ortus Solutions. We want to remind you that without their help, basically, we couldn't make this podcast. So some ways you can give back to Ortus to say thank you is you can actually register for our Into the Box LATAM conference going on December 3rd and 4th. Some English, some Spanish, a little bit of everything there. So you can register for that, and we'll tell you more about that later. And also, CFcast is our video service where we release new, free, and paid content every week. So a lot of great content there, and there's a small subscription, fee for those who want to get the paid content. And so there's a couple ways you can give back to Ortus for doing things for the community, and the podcast being one of them. And the other thing is Patreon support, right, Brad? There's 33 Patreons now.
33,000, something like that. It's a bunch.
Yeah, there's 33 Patreons, I believe, and that's providing almost 60% of the funding for the podcast. So you guys are doing your part to help out. We appreciate that too. So we'll thank those Patreon supporters at the end of the episode. Okay. We have a comment in there that Webman D, I wrote your names in for president and vice, modernize the White House.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not a citizen. I can't do that.
You couldn't pay me enough to put up with being president.
Anyways, that's about as much politics as we'll talk today. Let's get on with the show. Okay, so some CF Summit announcements. So the CF Summit website now includes more speakers and the schedule. It also looks like they've reduced the conference from 3 days down to 2 days. Well, it depends where you look for that. If you go to the Adobe portal, it still says 3 days. But if you look on the cfsummit.adobeevents.com, you'll see it's 2 days there. So there's quite a lot of good content.
Now that I didn't submit a session, maybe they couldn't get enough talks. What happened?
Yeah, Eric Peterson's in there.
They're going to have to accept all of Eric Peterson's talks, all like 9 of them. It's like, accepted, across the board. You're on.
No, there's quite a few good speakers, so I'll just share my screen here. You see we've got, some of the regulars, Charlie Earhart, Matthew Clemente, Dave Ferguson, we got Alicia as well, obviously. A couple that I've seen at previous CF Summits, and there's a couple new faces too. You can't forget Pete Freitag there, and we got a few newer ones. Some good topics. Our friend Brian Class, the AWS Master, is there. George Murphy will be there. Rick Sheaf, of course. There's Eric Peterson, Brian Sappi, Dan Skaggs. So a lot of these people we talk about in a lot of episodes. Minvo has some awesome presentations, and of course we all know Dan Wilson. But there's the Fusion Reactor guys. David Tattersall is going to be talking about how to modernize your app, which I thought was pretty interesting. So a lot of good content if you look at the schedule. The only thing I must say is, the schedule's updated now, so it has the right times. At first, these were showing up as 1:30 a.m. Pacific time for me. Nice. That's a little early, but now it's updated. So
a little time zone problem.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's some good content. Just a couple of tracks by the look of it.
What's the little event and local flag at the back at the top of your page? Does that let you actually switch between time zones?
Well, I think originally the event was in their time zone. It's probably India-based. And then when I went to local, it didn't change until I basically left the site, and then obviously just came back and it fixed it. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But
now that it's online, though, there really is no event time zone. It's just really local time is the only time they need at this point. That's all that matters. So
you'll notice there's a couple of different time blocks. It looks like 2 sessions going on at once would be the maximum. So you got a couple of sessions and a CF session, then a couple of sessions and then a CF session or 2. I know that there are a couple of sessions that they're still going to be adding or planning to add. I heard a little birdie say something about that. So there should be some more added to the schedule soon. But again, 2 days, a lot of good content, a lot of great speakers as usual. So pretty good. And apparently George needs a new photo. Scott said in the chat. I'll tell George you said that, Scott. But you want to say the 70s want his photo back? So yeah, so some good CF Summit announcements, and remember that's coming up here in a couple of weeks, and we'll tell you more about it in the conference section. Okay, well here, this is something for you, Brad. So fixes for Lucee's network drop issues that you're talking about Azure a little while ago.
Yeah, and to be clear, it wasn't necessarily directly a Lucee issue. I don't know if I talked about this in the podcast or not. I had sent some tweets out the other day asking if anybody had problems using Microsoft Azure, and specifically their managed databases, where it's all kind of just out there on the cloud. I'm pretty certain they use a sort of like kind of master slave SQL Server setup behind the scenes, which can fail over to different physical machines.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the clients I've been working with Ortus has been moving everything to Microsoft Azure, Kubernetes, Docker, and a new managed database, and they've been having a lot of problems. It kind of comes and goes, maybe like once a week, but it'll completely lock up one of their Lucee servers, and it'll all boil down to a Lucee thread running this is valid check to see if these data source connections are stale, if the connection's been closed, and occasionally they'll hang, and we're pretty certain, it's really hard to troubleshoot stuff that happens out on some managed magical cloud, right? We're pretty certain what will happen is I never even knew this, every minute, you cannot turn it off until this ticket. There's a feature in Lucee that every single minute, every single connection of every single data source will be looped over, and it'll call an is valid method on the JDBC driver, which basically says, is this connection still good? Which typically probably doesn't hurt much of anything, but this particular client has like 100 data sources, and you got to think there might be like a dozen or so connections per data source, and so it's like hundreds of these is valid checks like every single minute. There's no way to turn it off. You can't configure it. It's irrespective of the timeouts, the connection pooling settings. And so it's just, there's always hammering these as valid checks. And we're pretty certain whenever, Microsoft Azure's managed databases would fail over, every few days while they were doing some maintenance, and it would happen right as one of these as valid checks was running, that thread would just hang and it would never come back. And what's really bad about it is Lucee server does this all inside of a big old fat synchronized method that locks the entire connection pool until it's done. And so the connection pool just stays locked while this thread just goes out to lunch and never comes back. And then no threads anywhere on your server are allowed to put a connection back in the pool or get a new connection out of the pool. And the whole server just piles up full of requests because they're all just backed up, which is horrible for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's this total abuse of a synchronized method. This is my opinion, but I stand by it. I don't think you should ever be doing crap like hitting the database inside of a synchronized method that locks the entire flipping connection pool. That really pissed me off. Just bad design. But anyway, I did my yelling at Misha for that. Poor guy, he has to deal with me. But anyway, and Misha also helped me find out that this timeout that's supposed to be passed to the JDBC drivers that says, only wait this long, apparently wasn't even actually working correctly in Lucee. So the timeout would usually be passed as a 0, which meant never timeout, which is why these threads would just sit for days until they had to restart the server. Anyway, I just complained about the way Lucee works, but the super cool thing, the yay part of this is I put in some tickets. I talked with Misha, and he did a couple different fixes that I'm really hopeful will help out with this. I think it's one of those things that's like a big problem, but it only affects people with like a very specific setup. So like a lot of people never run into this because, how many people have some kind of master slave failover database or a managed, Azure database? It's just not that common, at least not in Lucee, I don't think. So, most of you are probably thinking, I never had any problem. Good for you. You never had the magic combination of doom.
Yeah, maybe you didn't have enough data sources, so yeah, it was less likely to time out when you're switching, or yeah.
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that all came to play at once. Having 100 data sources, the every minute check, the managed Azure stuff. But anyway, so the 2 new tickets allow you to turn off the every minute validation checks, and the alternative is you would check the little box that says validate this connection, and then what happens then is every time a CF query runs and Lucee grabs a connection from the pool, just at the point of use, it says, hey, are you still valid? which is great because if the servers have been failed over behind the scenes, it'll catch it and your users won't even see a problem. So that can be configured now. It can be turned off. The timeout issue, the network timeout's been fixed. It's configurable now. There's some new JVM arguments. So I'm super excited about that. And it's a good success story of Lucee being open source, which allowed me to dig in and find how this stuff was being used. And it'll come out in 5.3.8.
Okay.
Which
cool.
Hopefully isn't too long off. But yeah, that was my week, was poking around at Lucee and JDBC nonsense.
Sounds good. Well, I appreciate you doing the digging. I'm sure it's going to help other people, even if they haven't realized yet. That may be, the thing that's been bugging them for months and didn't know why it was happening. And guess we should ask Charlie, if you run into anything like that.
It's entirely possible it's bit people before, but they just had no clue what it was. Because it's a very, weird combination of, things that come together. I think you're right. A lot of people may have possibly hit it and they just restarted the server and shrugged and like, that was weird. They just went on.
Okay, so we got a little bit of a fun item here.
Yeah, you went crazy today with Ben Nadel's photos, didn't you?
Maybe. I was obviously I was on his site a lot because we do that every week as we get lots of his articles because he's a machine and he posts stuff out. But I just happened to run into a couple of photos. There are some older ones, and so I was like, I wonder how many photos he has there. So I looked on the site, and if you click on previous photo and next photo, you can go through a lot of photos. And so I started at number 1. And I went back to realize he has 845 photos on his site right now.
Nice. So I knew that you could put a URL variable that would make it load a certain photo. That way, if you wanted to link somebody to a blog and have your photo be on the top, you just have to know the photo ID, I guess.
Yeah, and so it was kind of cool. Like if you go through the first ones, there's some really old ones, way back to 2008, CF United. That seems to be where it started. And so there's some old faces in here. Sean Caulfield. Back in the day, and then Peter Bell. Some of the names of blogs that I used to read in the old days are here. There's some from user groups as well that he gets into. But Sam Farmer, I remember reading his blog posts.
Yeah, I see a lot of names through here, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember those people. Like Luis Mahano, we just found his picture. Yeah, I remember that guy. Whatever happened to him?
Yeah, some old ones of Mark Drew.
Yeah, so free handlebar.
That's some pretty interesting ones. Yep, but there's several different ones there. But Hal Helms, I remember his big leaving ColdFusion blog posts.
Hal Helms, he left ColdFusion, and then like a few years later, he came back and did a whole series on ColdBox, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm back into ColdFusion doing ColdBox," and then I think I only saw like 4 or 5 posts in the series, and I never heard from him again.
Yeah, interesting. But yeah, it's kind of fun.
I never got to meet Hal Helms, and I was always a little disappointed because I really liked reading his stuff. I would hear him talk at online user group meetings. I never got a chance to meet Hal Helms in person. I was kind of disappointed because he left the community and went over to, I think, Ruby on Rails back before I kind of got into the conference scene.
Yep. Yeah, so there's some good photos there. I just thought it was a fun thing to share, because we're always showing Ben's site off, but I just wanted to give you a little more info behind the scenes. So I wonder when he's going to hit 1,000, obviously after COVID.
Yeah, he's not getting any new photos at this rate. It should just be like Zoom snapshots. It's the only way you get to see anybody.
Yeah, the funny thing is there's a few in there with Ben with himself, because remember when he couldn't make Scotch on the Rocks one year and Kev McKay printed out those face masks that you pull over, and then it was a stretchy morph mask, and they were scary. Weird. And there were some other ones that just did paper cutouts with Ben, so Ben could be there. I
remember the paper cutouts.
Because everybody wanted those pictures with Ben, even if he wasn't there. Anyways, let's get back to the real news.
It's funny.
So the Online CF Meetup, building great user interfaces that fast. Oh, great user interfaces fast with Kendo UI. Sorry about that. I messed that title up.
TJ VanToll.
TJ VanToll. So I haven't looked at Kendo UI for a while. I know that for a while that was really popular. It was one of those up and coming frameworks and everything. So that's going to be held this Thursday, November the 5th, from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Time, and I'm pretty sure that's Standard Time, not Daylight Saving Time anymore. So for those of you that are struggling with that, make sure you get your clocks changed. Speaking of that, my laptop did not automatically update my time zone yesterday, and I had to like uncheck a
What?
million things and recheck them all. I showed up to one meeting early.
Well, at least early is better than late.
Yeah.
That's the only redeeming part of a. Well, no, it's not the only redeeming part. The other redeeming part is get an extra hour's sleep. But that's the main good part about this time change is if you forget about it, you're at least early and not completely
Not
missing
late.
it.
Yep. Pretty funny. So yeah, that looks like a good session there. But let's just recap on the connection pool stuff because Charlie did add some information. He said it can happen with ColdFusion as well as Lucee. So JDBC connection pools hanging up on check-in, check-out due to a thread hung in the fetch connection can happen for reasons other than a zero failover too. So yeah, it's probably pretty common.
Tricky.
So it sounds like you help make that a little more fault tolerant at least in the Lucee stuff, or less likely to
Hopefully.
break.
Mitch is actually talking about maybe just switching. There's a lot of kind of off-the-shelf JDBC connection pooling libraries now that you can just drop in that kind of have figured out the best ways to do this stuff. So that may happen in a future version of Lucee.
That sounds like a good
I've
option.
extensively read the code in Lucee that does this. I have obviously never seen the code in Adobe ColdFusion that does this, but I assume it's probably the same basic stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so we have an Ortus webinar update. The October webinar was moved, so it's no longer in October. So if you thought you missed it last week, sorry, something came up. We had to postpone it, so it's going to be this Friday, November the 6th, 11 a.m. Central Time. So I apologize for everybody doing that. And so that's the From Mura to ContentBox staying on the open source upgrade track. So so John Clausen will be doing that. Learn a bit about moving from Mura over to ContentBox if that's something you have to do, considering the latest Mura changes. So he's actually going to show you a full conversion of a Mura site over to ContentBox during that session. So it's going to be a good one. So you can go to ortusolutions.com/events/webinars to register for that today.
Sweet.
Okay. Next up, we have a Seattle CFUG hands-on deep dive into interacting with Thinkific API. So this follows up from their October session where they did you sort of getting started with the Thinkific API and if you're using APIs in general. So it's going to be Wednesday, November the 11th, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time. It's going to be hosted by William Frankhauser and Liam O'Daniel. And that's the Seattle ColdFusion user group. And so there's a meetup for that. We'll share the link in the show notes. You guys can find out more about that. But I really enjoyed the first session on Thinkific API. As I mentioned previously, I've used that with a couple of customers and I really like it. So I'm curious to see what extra stuff that he's doing to learn a few things maybe. Maybe I'll even contribute to it. Okay, in case you missed it, we have a recording link now for the Mid-Michigan CFUG October meetup where Nick Kwiatkowski talked about DevOps Evolution and ColdFusion. So that was almost 2 hours in the video. So it's a really long one, lots of good content.
Okay.
So you guys can check that one out as well. So
1 hour, 56 minutes, and 41 seconds.
Yep, that was a good one. So definitely should check that out. Okay, so next up, we talk about CFCast. So just one new video this week. We have a CF config. So configure your CFML servers with CF config. And the video is on managing mail server properties.
Good old mail server properties.
Yep. Which
is it's interesting. I never realized until I was writing CF config that both Lucee and Adobe allow you to have more than one mail server. Because you ever look in your CF config JSON, even if you only have one mail server, it's always an array of mail servers because the order they're defined in is the order they're used in. For Lucee, it's just a first class feature that you can define as many mail servers as you want. If one fails, it'll go on to the next one. In Adobe ColdFusion, I believe you have to have enterprise, and then it just simply has a primary and a secondary. I don't think it lets you have like unlimited like Lucee does. But I had never actually realized that you could have like a failover mail server in Adobe. So anyway, just a little interesting thing. If you ever noticed your mail servers are an array in CF config, it's because there can be more than one on both engines.
Very cool. Okay, so let's get into our conferences or training. I guess training and conferences. So we have some bad news here. We had to cancel the quick training this month. We're still planning on doing it, but we had some circumstances come up, so we're not able to do it. For those who did register, we've reached out, and we're going to be moving that probably early in the new year because of the busyness in November, December. So we apologize for that, but don't worry, we will be bringing it soon. And yeah, this gives you another time to sign up, John.
Not to mention anyone by name, but
yeah, there's a million Johns in this group, right? Okay, and then so we also have the conference from DigitalOcean. It's going to be the first virtual 24-hour community conference starting November 10th at 10 a.m. Eastern. A lot of great content there. Tons and tons of sessions. So if you guys are either working with DigitalOcean or thinking about it, I mean, we love it. So if you're not sure what provider to use, you may want to look at that. But they've got a lot of great content in there for a lot of different things. So definitely think you should check that out. And then we have a couple more events that Charlie actually reached out and gave it to us. So AWS has some events coming up here, and so basically there's a couple of pages. Let me bring it up so I can show you. So the Modern Applications Online event. So it's Wednesday and Thursday this week, and so basically the agenda has sort of two different things. So we have organization level operations on the Wednesday, and the Thursday is more of the application level design. So this is in addition to their normal events, and they actually have reInvent coming up here soon as well. So reInvent, I believe, is going to be sorry, my dates on this here. Sorry, I'm gonna pull up the link for this here. So reInvent, which is usually a huge 5,000-6,000 in-person event, it may be more than that. It's huge. But this is actually going to be from November 30th to December 18th, a three-week free virtual conference. So that conference is usually, basically a week long, and it's crazy in depth. So if you guys are never had the chance to go to reInvent, this is probably the perfect opportunity for you. So a lot of great stuff, deep dives, registration's available, and it's free. I mean, usually this is a pretty expensive conference, and it's kind of nice. There's some good positives with COVID for sure. So not too many great free conferences out there beforehand. So
yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff that was made available now when everything went online.
Yep, exactly. So yeah. Okay, we also have our CF Summit updates, as we mentioned. And so CF Summit is going to be November 17th and 18th, according to their website. The portal still says through the 19th, but pretty sure it's only going to be 2 days now. So with that being said, as we mentioned, there's a lot of information on the website now, so you can get the speakers, you can register, you can get the sessions. All the content is starting to populate there. So if you look here, go through it and see what's there. But again, it's free. So register. If you don't want to go to all the sessions, you don't have to. Pick and choose as needed. Registration, I'm already registered, so can't see that form. But a lot of good speakers there. So and they said they've still got a couple more to sneak out. So definitely check that out. And then if you guys are looking for this Adobe ColdFusion online certification, it's now online as well. So you can get certified as an Adobe certified professional through their online program, and it's still at the introductory price of $4.99, I believe. So you guys can sign up for that before the price goes up. There's more information on the blog, and we'll share that in the show notes for you too. Okay, so Brad, into the box Latam. Are you ready? Are you excited?
Sure. I'm always excited, man. I wake up in the morning and I'm just excited.
So you're going to be learning Spanish in next month?
I doubt I'm going to learn any more than I already know, which is just enough to be
get in trouble
at it. Yeah. Just enough to insult someone's mom on accident.
Yeah. So Brad is going to be there. Luis is going to be there. It's going to be 2 days of good content. thanks to Google Translate, I can actually see more about the site. But it is focused on a Latin community, Latin America, and so it's going to be another good event. Registration is only $7. We're trying to make it really affordable to everyone in the region, but it's available for you as well. So there's some English content as well as Spanish content. I know some of the regulars who come to our conferences are kind of excited because they're coming from South America, and they're excited to see some Spanish content as well. So definitely check that out. Looking forward to having that. Last year was in person, one-day event. It was a big success, so we're hoping that the online event can do just as well this year as well.
Anytime you get a Gardo dance scene, it's always a big success. So
yeah, it was pretty fun. Okay, well, let's start talking about blogs, tweets, and videos of the week. So here's an interesting one to start off. Can you guess who from?
Ben Nadel.
Yeah, he's got a lot of good content, I must say. So this one's the power of cascading tag attributes in Lucee. So, well, it's not always in just Lucee, but he always has the version that he puts in there.
He kind of combines two things. The attribute collection feature he shows is just CFML. So Adobe ColdFusion and Lucee both are going to do attribute collection. But the this.tag, I'm 98% certain, is a purely Lucee only feature, and it's an amazing feature. It's a shame Adobe doesn't pick up on stuff like that. But yeah, he kind of shows them together to create a really nice, compelling use case for the two of them.
Yeah, so the cool thing is he basically ties into this.tag, and one of the biggest selling points for using Lucee is the fact that you can put an add token equals false for every CF location in your site in a single line in a single place.
Yeah,
and if you're not using Lucee, that's probably the main reason that most people switched.
Any of you people that have had to do a massive find and replace in your entire code base to find all the CF locations to add in the add token, the Lucee developers are all chuckling at you in the corner because they put one line in their application.cfc. So the feature, if people aren't familiar with it, is in your application.cfc, you can declare a struct. And so it's this.tag, and inside the struct, you put a key for the name of the tag without the CF. So like this.tag.mail, right? So mail is also a struct. And then the keys inside that inner struct are the actual attributes to the mail tag, or whatever tag you want it to be. It could be the CF dump tag, the CF location tag, any tag in the ColdFusion language. And you can basically create default inputs that instantly apply to the entire application without you needing to go find every place in your code you have a CFML tag, which means, let's say you drop in a third-party library, right? And they use CFMail, but it's not going to work without a local proxy server, right? Not a problem on Lucee. This.tag.mail.proxy, whatever the heck the attribute's named, and now you just added an override attribute value to every single CFMail tag in your entire app. Super crazy useful. This is the kind of little things Lucee's thought of over the years. I mean, this has been since the Rilo days they added this. So Lucee has so in Ben Nadel's blog post, he has like kind of 3 layers set up. He has like his like global defaults he puts in his application.cfc, this.tag.mail. Server. Then he creates a struct at the point of use, which he passes in using the attributes collection, which is a super handy thing that's been around since like ColdFusion 8 or so. Notice that if you're doing a function call, it's arguments collection. If you're doing a tag, it's attributes collection, right? So he can override at the point of use attributes that can be built up dynamically. And then he has the actual CFML tag, which on Gavin's screen, if you're watching live, is a script version of the CFML tag. Then he has, even like the third level where the 2 and the subject is overridden. And it's a really nice kind of, he says cascading. He has like his defaults at the application. He has dynamically built attributes and then the actual parameters of the tag itself. It's nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so I really like this. And, a couple people in the chat didn't know that it existed. And I'm pretty sure that it's, less well known. I know if you've ever been to one of Gert's sessions, he usually always, says that. That's like
I've known about it for
point.
years, but I could totally see it, somebody not noticing. Lucee doesn't do a great job of documenting stuff like this and making sure people are aware of it. I mean, somewhere there's probably some blog post from 10 years ago where this got mentioned, but I don't even know how I'd go find the docs for this. I just know it because I remember back when they added it to Rilo way back in the day.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of the Lucee documentation of new features, a lot of the Rilo documentation of new features all died with the old Rilo blog, which is sort of sad. A lot of that never got reproduced for Lucee, but
Yeah.
lots of sweet stuff like that.
Yeah. So that's a cool one for sure. So,
That
and
that
again,
was
like,
actually sorry, that was actually the not the impetus, but the idea that sparked the similar feature in CommandBox, where I allow you to provide default values for any argument for any command in the CLI. So if every time you use the RM command, you want force to be true, I totally lifted that idea right off of what Lucee does. That's where I got the idea from. Anyway,
yep.
side thought.
And Charlie also mentions if you have the secure profile, the add token automatically defaults to no, basically without any code changes at all. So that's part of the ColdFusion secure profile. But obviously, it's real nice. It'd be nice to have it in CF because there's a lot of other tags that you use it on. So it'll be very useful. For example, that mail one was a perfect example. So
Yeah, CF dump is another nice one. If you hate like the Lucee orange
oh yeah,
dump styles, you can override your CF dump globally to use the Adobe ColdFusion colors or whatever. That's
yeah.
another common place I've seen it used.
And that's another thing that I'm sure most people don't even know you can do either. Is that you can switch the colors from the the old Rylo Lucee colors to the normal, more traditional ColdFusion colors.
Some people really hated the orange. It never bothered me, but I also have like no sense of fashion, like whatsoever. So maybe that's why it never bothered me. See, look, I'm wearing the Lucee orange shirt right now. I have no clue. I'm clueless.
I know I'm not allowed to wear my bright orange shirts unless I'm going to Home Depot, but then I get asked where everything is. So.
Yeah, I don't work here. Sorry.
Yep. Okay, we also had another tweet from you. You're busy on the Twitterverse this week.
Yeah, I think of stuff all the time, and I'm like, I should probably tweet that. That might be useful, but I never do it. Somebody asked me how to get a list with CFconfig of all the data sources on a server. And of course, this doesn't have to be a CommandBox server. It could be a traditional Adobe ColdFusion installation or Lucee installation. So I thought I'd just throw it in a tweet. So the CFconfig data source list gives you a nice human readable list of all your data sources. And if you wanted to just have the data source names, nothing else, you can do CFconfig show data sources, which that command by itself just dumps out a JSON struct of all the data source definitions. And then from inside a command box, you can pipe that into hash struct key list, which actually runs it through the ColdFusion struct key list function. And then I even set the delimiter to be comma space. And you get this really nice, data source name 1, comma space, data source name 2. Nice little readable thing if you wanted to then use that in the report. It's a quick and easy way. The person that had asked me that question was doing some automation where they would, spin up customer servers and they would, kind of automate inserting of data sources and things. And it was all done with CFconfig, and they wanted to be able to, pull out that list and be able to stick it into a report somewhere. Here were all the data sources that were added, kind of thing. So.
Yep. Cool.
That was that one.
Okay. So next up,
Ben Nadel.
Ben Nadel. And this one here is generating a QR code with Itex PDF 7 barcodes. And so this is pretty funny because it's really really old code from Tim Cunningham from like 9 or 10 years ago, and it was using Itex 5 under the hood, and I guess now they're up to 7 or whatnot. And so
Itex used to be the PDF library that Lucee used, if I recall, or Rilo back in the day.
Yeah, it looks like Itex PDF 7 in Lucee right now.
Lucee 5.3 switched to the Flying Saucer PDF library, which is based on the PDF from 4ML. Like I can never say it right. I think they left Itex a while back. That may have been also due to licensing issues, not issues, but just the license of it.
Yeah, understandable. And so this was a pretty interesting one. Again, not too complicated. A lot of people have built these before. It gives you
Isn't there like a barbecue library I've seen people use? I've never had to deal with barcodes, but I see people asking about them now and then.
Yeah, well, that was the interesting about this is that, a good blog post. If you're looking at QIs, it's really nice. He's got the little generator tool built in, but they started a little discussion on Twitter, and I thought that was interesting to share too. So let's have a look at that.
Well, yeah, I don't know if that barbecue library does QR codes or if it only does just like strict barcodes.
Yep, and so Ben said he wanted to ping James, because James Mowbray has a lot of little tools and everything else, and he's like, using the open source Itex PDF codes require you to open source your entire application. So that's kind of a
Is
big.
it GPL?
Well, that basically James was saying that's one of the things that you're requiring. Is it built in? Does it say something here?
I mean, that sounds like a
Using it
sort of.
free requires you to also open source your application. That said, they do have a paid version which gets you, so you don't have to expose your source code.
I'm curious if it's a GPL license. So I'm trying to see if I can pull it up. Oh, it's a GPL.
Yeah.
The Afro General Public License.
So, long story short, if you're going to use that, it sounds like you need to pay it, pay for that. But James said using bwhip.js or Zint doesn't require developers to open source their code, and so there's a couple other things here. But anyway, so there's some other gists here using other tools. So I like it that it's not just a nice blog post; there's a discussion that comes around it too. There's another Java library here, so you can a few lines of code and be done. So if you want to look at something like this,
yeah,
this one looks
the post is
familiar.
interesting because it's basically writing the QR code out, like all the little squares are individually being drawn out, based on the byte array of what you're encoding in it. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so that's kind of neat. Nice little functional, using streams, byte array.
I'm curious if you could do that using any of the ColdFusion image functions.
And that's
just to draw a series of squares and just render it directly as a JPEG or something.
Yeah. Not sure. Pretty interesting. But yeah, I like the fact that it also sparked a little conversation in the community. So, pretty neat. Now, this one was pretty interesting too. Another one from our friend Ben. Like that photo.
Who is that? Matthew Reinbold. I remember that name.
Yeah. Okay, so performing a case-sensitive search on a case-insensitive column using Collate in MySQL. This is pretty interesting because I've been working with Postgres a lot for a customer with Ortus, and everything is, you have to like lowercase everything to do case-insensitive search. So it's kind of funny that when you actually want to do a sensitive search, because applications.
Yeah, usually it's the other way around. Yeah, usually you're saying I wish it was case insensitive, not I wish it were case sensitive.
Yeah. So and here, old tables, etc., may have different collations and everything, and it may not be appropriate for that. Basically, is the gist of it. And so he does some work, and so basically he writes a query. And if you do something like just using the collate clause in the where, which I didn't know you could even do this, which is pretty neat. So you can collate it on the fly to a different collation and do a call. But when he does the explain on this, it skips the indexes.
Yeah, it does a table scan.
Well, yeah, because the index isn't on the collate.
Yeah, behind the scenes, it probably has to go through and manipulate each of the rows to be able to compare them.
Yeah, so what I liked is he came up with the idea of doing a where clause where the slug is equal to AAAA, and then you use the collate. And so by doing that, you actually use the index, and then you only get 3 rows back because the index trims
it's able to optimize it. Yeah, it's able to optimize it by finding at least the matches that are a case insensitive match. And then on top of that, it filters it additionally with the case sensitive, but then it's a much smaller. I mean, it depends on the cardinality of the data, but presumably it's not going to match most of the records.
Yeah,
That's
so
a clever
again,
idea.
Yeah, just, nothing too special, but, like, would I have thought of that? Probably. Would it take me a while? Probably. So, but
next time you need to do it, you're going to Google, and this blog post from Ben's going to come up and be like, "Oh, Ben, you always have the answer I need."
Yeah.
And so that's MySQL, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
I assume there's a similar way to do it in SQL Server.
Yeah, I think the idea comes about the same. Like you can do casting and everything in Postgres. I'm sure you can do something coalescing in Microsoft SQL Server too. But I just like the idea of make sure you use the index even on something crazy like that where you have to do some weird casting or collation.
So here's the question for Eric: does QB have a built-in method in which you can do a where and specify that, and it'll automatically use the correct syntax based on the grammar?
Possibly. We'll have to see.
The answer is probably whether or not anyone's ever asked Eric for that, or if Eric's ever needed it.
Yeah.
I can see it not supporting it just because it's not a super common thing, but when you
Yeah.
need it, you need it, you know?
Yep. The grammar would be interesting for sure, and how to add that. But that's a good thing about Q being quick. It supports the grammar. So if there's 5 different ways to do it, each grammar can be a little different because depending on the grammar, depending on the database you're using, it uses that grammar, so it translates it and does some pretty tricky stuff sometimes. Like if you ever try and do like a limit on some of the data sources where
Mm-hmm.
there's no simple limit, like give me like the last 5. Sometimes that can be a lot of code. So
Yeah. In case you're curious, queries in ColdFusion is case sensitive when you do a comparison.
oh,
Yeah, and that's
interesting.
because I mean behind the scenes it's using Java,
And Java's
and
always
it's a significant performance overhead if you have any decently sized result set. Because if you don't want it to be case sensitive, you have to wrap it in the upper function. And it's not using indexes anyway for QAQs, so that doesn't necessarily matter. But you'll see a lot of two uppercase, string calls on the underlying engine if you have thousands of rows. So always something to keep in mind.
So before we jump to the next article, we have something from Dan Card saying, should there be a rule? I usually call this the bus rule, right? There should be a rule that Luis, Bad, and Brandon and a few others can never travel in the same car or plane together, sort of like how the cabinet members are held back for the State of the Union. They're saying we don't want all the head honchos in the community all going down on the same plane. I
Can't be
don't think that's
taken
in
out.
place yet, but yeah,
All
that'll
right,
be
Gavin, we'll
tough.
let you take Air Force One by yourself.
Thanks. So next up, we have a little blog post from Fusion Reactor, but how to secure Fusion Reactor and JSP applications in Tomcat using LDAP. So if you guys have
Oh,
LDAP and you're using Fusion Reactor and you want to maybe use that to tie into the access,
I
it's a
didn't
good
realize they
article.
allowed an external authentication mechanism.
Yeah, I
Interesting. Is
wasn't
this a
aware of
new
this either.
feature?
Charlie, is this a new feature? We'll see if he
Yeah,
answers.
Charlie. Answer all our questions for us, Charlie. And I'm curious how extendable this is. Like, is it just hard coded to LDAP, or is this like a provider based thing where I could write my own plugin for Fusion Reactor and tie it into like my application login? I'm really curious now. LDAP, LDAP. This is all LDAP specific. I'm also curious if it requires Tomcat. Like, can you do this in command box, or is this using some Tomcat specific feature?
I'm sure you can get it working, Brad. So I thought it was interesting. I know a couple of our clients use LDAP exclusively, but we keep Fusion Reactor separate. So I'm wondering if that's something they may consider now. But
Yeah,
good
it is
to
kind of cool though, because it sucks when you have to manage a separate set of logins, for a tool like Fusion Reactor. And then if, a developer leaves or is added, you have to go make sure you update, all those things. It's really nice to be able to consolidate it in
yeah,
LDAP.
especially when you're using lots of external tools like Sentry and then all your other external tools does get added.
All right, Charlie says it was added in Fusion Reactor 8.2, and of course the current version of Fusion Reactor is 8.5. See, it's dealing with some Realm stuff that goes in your Tomcat server.json. I'm not sure. I lose tracks of some stuff if it's just part of the J2E spec or if it's Tomcat specific. Like, uh, oh crap, what's the thing you can put in server.xml? It's a Tomcat. It's not a filter, not a servlet filter. It's a valve. Like valves are like a Tomcat specific thing. It's not, a J2E spec. I'd have to figure out what the equivalent of this would be for like Undertow.
Yeah, not sure.
It looks like Fusion Reactor is delegating back to some stuff that's just built into the to servlet containers, which makes sense. Unfortunately, that means this probably isn't like super pluggable where you could just like tie it into an application. But
Hmm.
nonetheless, I'm still impressed by this. I like this.
See, even Brad learned something on this show.
Always learn something.
Yep. Okay, next up we have another blog post from Ben Nadel. So this one here is one of those things that you may not know as well. It's something that those who know love it, and those who don't know they're missing it. But talking about struct iteration with CF Loop using super intuitive aliases.
Super
And
intuitive.
and I know that different versions of ColdFusion introduced a lot of these things at different levels, and I still have some legacy apps running really old ColdFusion code, and it really bugs me when I try and do this, and it says can't do this. But basically, there's a couple of different ways to looping through. And so a lot of times you have like the old school item approach. So as you loop through the struct, each one gives you the item. And then the newer approach, you get the item and also the index. And then you can also get value and keys. And so this one is much more common. And basically it just allows you when you're looping through just to, loop over something and the collection of data and then the item, the key, and then basically have the key and the values. And so nothing too special, but like I said, if you didn't know
the each member function down below and how you would do the equivalent in there, which is basically just defining the named, defining the argument names in your closure.
Yep.
As well, so the equivalent to people, because he even anticipates. I'm sure people will look at me and using tags and script and begrudge it. So he shows the script version. Here's a little thing that I believe is a Lucee only feature, unless Adobe snuck it in. In the CF loop tag, which of course in Lucee the CF loop tag and script syntax is lighter weight than Adobe. You can get rid of the CF, you can get rid of the parentheses, you get rid of those ridiculous commas because it's not a function call. Hate it, hate it, hate it. And it's just loop, open, close brackets. Lucee lets you do a times attribute. So you can just say CF loop times equals 50 and you're done. Now, one thing I don't like about it is you can't, unless Lucee fixed this, I put in a ticket a while back for it, you can't get the stupid iterator or index variables when you use times. Because I'll use loop times equals more often than I ever thought I would, just for stupid little scripts and things that I'm doing. I'm running performance tests. I just want to do it in a 50-time loop. And traditionally, you do CF loop from 1 to 50 index equals. But it's just a nice little super simple shortcut to say CF loop times equals 50. Done. But I wish Lucee would still let me get the iterator index at the same time, because I still want to know the number. But it's just a little bit less verbose.
Well, that sounds like a pull request, Brad. You should have got that in for Hacktoberfest.
Oh, jeez. But yeah, those things make it handy. It always sucks when you have to declare your own variable above the loop and then increment it yourself to keep track of stuff. Or you can have that obligatory line of code at the top of your collection loop where you grab the value for the current item you're on. I always love these little things that just reduce the boilerplate in your code. The engine can just hand it to you.
Yep. And the funny thing is, according to Gert, the tag is actually faster than the function-based iteration. And so it's a micro-optimization, as Ben says, to be sure, but, something to be aware of as well.
I'm curious if that's still the case.
Yeah.
I'm curious why they would compile to any different bytecode. Like, why would the bytecode be different? Now, maybe there's a really good answer to that. I mean, I say that sort of out of ignorance, but it just makes you wonder, why would Lucee need to generate different bytecode for a script loop or a tag loop? Questions of the ages.
I don't know. But Charlie also mentioned that sadly CF still doesn't support item and index for collections or structs, only for arrays.
And I've gotten so used to using those with Rilo and Lucee over the years. See, Adobe ColdFusion, listen up. We don't need half the crap you have in 2020. Just give us this simple stuff. It's so simple. It's so useful.
The funny thing is, talking about, all that here, and in the chat, Scott Steinbeck says tabs and spaces. And the funny thing is, I've got a blog.
That's the tweet. Next one on the list, man.
It's like, Scott, are you reading our notes?
Is he in our Google Doc for the show notes?
I don't think so. But so Zach said, if you prefer Lucee and prefer spaces over tabs, sadly, you're going to be using more memory for your app because the generated Java classes include the source code. And the same goes for the complex paths and whatever. But basically, if you have spaces, you're going to be using way more source code. So, I thought that's kind of funny.
Is that... I saw that tweet. I kind of assumed it was a little tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
It's not a significant thing we're talking about.
I don't know, there's a lot of spaces.
Can that be turned off to disable the source code? I'm curious about that.
I don't know. I would have thought they would minify it, wouldn't they?
When you load the class, does it also load the source code part of it into memory? I'd have to dig into what actually is loaded into memory as part of the class loading. Same goes for deep directory paths, complex component names. Have a look at the files and CF classes.
Oh, so he's trying to say that our file naming convention that might be a problem too then, huh?
I don't know. Let me fire up my Java decompiler and go grab a random class file from one of my Lucee servers.
Yep.
Dude.
I'll have to do that. But another note from the chat. Charlie said, for what it's worth, Adobe does often add such little things and often great little tweaks. And basically, those types of things are what ends up in his hidden gems talk. More to come in a couple of weeks. So
His hidden gems.
Gems.
Yeah, that's how Gert did a presentation once on hidden gems before somebody was like, "Yeah, English is dumb. It's gems." Yeah, I'm looking at decompiled source code for a Lucee index.cfm. I don't see. Maybe this is a bad example since it's a CFM. I'm just curious where in the class file it allegedly stores this stuff. I don't have any CFCs. This was a super simple app I spun up.
Okay, while Brad's doing that, I'll tell you about CF Jobs. So, getcfmljobs.com has over 35 positions right now from the last few months. We have 0 new ones this week. We had 3 last week. None have been posted this week. But still go check it out. There's a lot of good jobs listed there. And just for those who didn't listen last week, tisk on you, there are a lot of good jobs listed here. So you can see some of the ones from the last couple of weeks. So position in San Diego, a couple in Canada, a few remote positions as well, Reno, Roseville, another Reno one. So lots of jobs. A couple more in Canada. It seems to be like Canadians are coming out of hibernation already. Lots of work going on there. So I know they're actually going to hibernation. But anyway. But Ortus is hiring as well. We're still looking for the right person. So I know we've been interviewing a lot of people. You've been busy with that. Have we picked someone yet, or are we still going through that process? I know we had quite a few applications.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you since you've been doing interviews.
I'm just a cog in the wheel. They say, "Hey, Brad, interview this guy." I'm like, "Okay." No, I'm not sure where we are at. I know we've interviewed a bunch of people and we've been talking about them. I think we're also trying to decide how many positions we're gonna fill. Yeah. So if you're out there and you haven't sent a resume, you can always definitely send that in. I know we had some PTO that slowed down the hiring stuff, but sorry, I'm also sidetracked because I'm reading decompiled Lucee source code. I'm not seeing the original CFML source anywhere in these. I'm really curious if Zach can clarify maybe what he's talking about there. Or maybe this is on like a brand new version of Lucee that hasn't been released yet. Interesting.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Okay, so back to the CF Loop collection index. Charlie found an issue tracker requesting it back in 2016. He's added the link in here.
Who submitted it? Was it Luis or Adam Cameron? Oh, it was Adam Cameron! Man, I swear it hadn't loaded when I made that guess yet. 4 years ago.
Yep.
This is probably just a handful of lines of ColdFusion or of Java code, unfortunately, to support this.
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah. Interesting too. He asked for a lot more options. So. And then Charlie's got a comment on it, which Charlie's great about doing that. And but yeah, the bug tracker is a lot of good stuff. If there's something that you think should be there, definitely check it out. Then go vote. We've got 4 votes on it right now. So
vote twice a day. Vote once for president, if you're an American, that is, and then vote for the ticket. Get all your votes in. Get them out of your system.
Yep.
Vote early and often on the Adobe tracker.
I don't think it would be too hard to add either, but anyways.
All right, so we hit jobs. I think you did that while I was busy staring at my Java decompiler.
Yep, so next up we have ForgeBox Module of the Week. And so this one is one of our app templates. So when you're using CommandBox, you can start up do a ColdBox create app and then use a template. And so one of the templates we have is the Elixir app template. We used to have an Elixir Bower template, but that's deprecated now. So the new Elixir app uses Webpack, and basically leverages ColdBox and ColdBox Elixir for all your asset management and compilations. So the idea is you basically use the resources folder, and it has a bunch of conventions. If you put all your resources in the resources/assets, you can put a JavaScript folder, a CSS folder, etc. Elixir will go and combine, version them, copy them, and even Babelify your code, minify them.
What does Babelify mean?
So basically makes it work in JavaScript even if you're using, new modern things. So a lot of the Vue code that we run, JavaScript can't run Vue files, but
so it kind of like transpiles it to like just
Yep.
stock standard JavaScript, even if you're using all the clever
Exactly.
syntax.
Yep, exactly what it means. And so it'll do all that, and then it puts it in the includes folder, and so it'll do all that. So this is a great starting point. You can add it to an existing app, but if you are going to do that, I'd recommend basically creating a sample app using the Elixir app template, and we can find out more about it on Forgebox, and I'll pull up that so you can see it. And there's a GitHub repo for it as well. But yeah, so it does include dependencies for Bootstrap and jQuery, and there's actually quite a lot of information. And we've even done videos in the previous Into the Boxes on Elixir, but basically it wraps up Webpack, makes it all usable pretty easily too, which is not a hard thing, not an easy thing to do. Sorry, with Webpack. But so yeah, so once you do it, you do need to do an npm install.
Did I lose your voice? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, so basically, you get it started. So do a box install, start the server, run an npm install, and then basically follow the conventions. And so a lot of good information. We use it for a lot of things, but it has the Webpack configuration there for you already. And so this does the hard work for you. It includes some other modules. We actually have an npm package for ColdBox Elixir, and it's requiring Webpack as well. But here,
You know what this needs?
yeah, so it needs
You know what this needs, right?
some more of
Needs
your
to be-
ASCII art.
Needs to be rewritten in CFML as a command box module.
Yep, you can do that next, Brad. But shows you some examples. But this basically mixes your app.js and your styles, these specific JavaScript files, and then spits them out in a certain file name. But definitely a cool, easy way to use Webpack. It's a nightmare without it. Trust me, I've tried to use it before, and I usually end up just using the Elixir stuff. So if you're great with
Let's
Webpack,
move on to
go
this
for it.
VS Code hint because I'm already loving it. I'm seeing it here in the show notes.
Well, you can't jump ahead, Brad. That's not allowed.
Oh, I got to. I'm looking at this. I'm like, yes, I need this in my life.
Okay, so our VS Code hint, tip, and trick of the week. You want to tell us about it then?
Yeah, trailing spaces allows you to highlight trailing spaces and delete them in a flash. I somehow managed to always get trailing spaces in my source code, and part of this may be because I use ColdFusion Builder for a long time, and I don't think it helps manage it very well. But I think I'll be deleting, a previous line of code that was tabbed in, and those tabs will get sucked up to the previous line, and of course you can't see them. And you go to commit your code, and you get a bunch of white space changes that all are trailing space. When I did the recent pull request to Undertow, they have a very strict syntax checker built into the build. It won't even compile your code if you have so much as a single extra space on the end of a line, which got pretty annoying. But I'm just thinking like, geez, I needed this extension right here. So highlight all that trailing space, delete them. It's nice.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. I mean, I know that these days with our code editor, we have editor config files and everything, so it should remove, or you at least have settings for them for your project. But sometimes, those aren't set up, and something like this is kind of nice.
Does format have anything for that?
Well, this will do everything, not just your CF code, which is a good thing because CF format doesn't
No, I know.
do everything.
I just want to compare
does.
I just want to compare the specific feature to what other tools ColdFusion developers currently have. So CommandBox already has a command called remove trailing spaces. This was sent to me as a pull request along with a handful of commands. Alias is RTS, remove trailing spaces. I've used that before. The only somewhat vaguely annoying thing about it is it I have to go run the command against my code base for it to apply. I like something that can happen just right inside your IDE.
Yep.
That way, it's just as you're typing, stuff is just immediately being cleaned up because you see it and you're like, oh yeah.
And the cool thing about this too is that you can say delete only the modified line. So when you do it, it only fixes the code you've written, not the entire file, which means that your commit is not messed up because you've got a bazillion changes.
I like that. So the pull request I mentioned just a couple minutes ago that we sent to Undertow, one of the things that was a little annoying about it was they had some editor config thing that had settings in the repo for like how many characters would be allowed on a line. It would automatically break comments and stuff like that. And one of the issues that we had was completely unrelated lines in these Java classes that we weren't even touching as part of our pull would get these like auto formatting changes, which I don't like sending a pull request that has a bunch of completely unrelated formatting changes just because it creates noise.
It shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Well, yeah, so that would have been nice if it had only touched the parts of the file I was actually in, as opposed to going through and changing random junk. But anyway,
yep,
that's a cool feature.
Yep, just real quick here. See, in the editor config, we have a trim trailing white spaces false, insert final new line false. So there's our options in the editor config stuff for that. And you can have indent styles and etc. So depending on your app, you can set those up. And those editor config files, there's a plugin for VS Code, there's one for Sublime, and probably not for Builder. Sorry, Brad. But
there's probably something for Eclipse.
Yeah, I know. I'm just messing with you. Yep, just messing with you.
All right, okay. Well, it's 1:05, and I've got some ramen that I'm going to go eat today.
Well, then I guess I better get on with this Patreon supporters here.
Yeah,
so
let's do it.
So thank you to everyone who's spending your hard-earned and well-taxed dollars.
Well-taxed.
Sorry, I had to throw something in there. Actually, it's not even true because we've got some international supporters too from other countries, and so I have no idea what their taxes are like. But we got people spending their hard-earned money to fund us, to basically support this podcast and the other Patreon projects through Ortus, CommandBox, ForgeBox, ColdBox, ContentBox, and all the other box products. So we thank you for your patronage, your Patreon support, and we thank everybody else as well for the issues and documentation and all the other Hacktoberfest support that you've given us as well. But these guys are putting down the green stuff, so we have to say thank you to them.
Putting down the green stuff.
So
it's green, it's moldy.
Moldy money. Hey, it's still valid, right?
Who's reading the names?
I'll read the names this week. So thank you, Ben Nadel, Brett DeLine, Carl Van Staten, Charlie Earhart, Da Lee, Dan Card, Daniel Garcia, David Ballinger, Didier Lesnicki, Don Bellamy, Edgardo Caberas, Eric Hoffman, Gary Knight, Giancarlo Gomez, Jan Yannick, Jason Daiger, Jeff McLean, Jeremy Adams, Jonas Erickson, Jordan Clark, Joseph Lamery, Kai Koenig, Laxmo Terohadi, Mario Rodriguez, Matthew Darby, Matthew Clemente, Mingo Hagen, Ross Phillips, Scott Steinbeck, Sean Oden, Stephen Klotz, Synaptrix, and Yogesh Misir. So we got a pretty big list there. I'm going to have to lose my breath just to read them all out. But if you want to go see their pretty pictures, you can go to autosolutions.com/about-us/sponsors. And if you want to go to join that list, you can go to patreon.com/autosolutions. So, got a lot of great supporters, and we thank all of you. And thanks for those who tuned in live, and for the rest of you listening on your earbuds. So, have a good week, everybody. Don't forget to vote on Adobe and the presidential election, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Show notes for this episode can be found at cfmlnews.modernizeordie.io, where you can also subscribe to your favorite podcast player like Spotify or iTunes. We also have the link to YouTube to find more videos just like this. The music used in this podcast is under a royalty-free license from Sound.com and Blue Tree Audio.